go back
like
and
that.
forth. You have half bow tie, half regular tie. What's your philosophy on that?
Well,
Mix it up a little bit?
variety is a spice of life,
All
man.
right, good. Do you do the butterfly tie when you tie up the stitches, or do you do that? Change that too.
I don't know if I do that, but
Okay, all right. See, I know the medical lingo. I got it down.
Kind of.
All right, health screenings, doctor. Lots of people talk about it. When do we know? How do we know it? There's all sorts of information out there. How do we keep everything straight?
yeah. So this came up because in the news this week, from a screening standpoint, U.S. Preventative Services Task Force has a change in recommendations on PSA screening.
Oh, this is important for me.
Yeah,
Since
so
I'm now 50.
Everybody gets all excited about that from the men's side of thing. We could have talked about breast cancer screening and mammograms
Right,
and what the
that's-
frequency is,
right.
and that's always been debated too. Both tests fall in the line of screening, and the general concept of this, I think everybody is completely on board, right? If you have a disease that is quote unquote cancer, that's bad. And if you can detect it early, then you could potentially treat it and cure it, and that's great. So that's what we need to do, 100%. And the general concept, if that were possible, man, that would be awesome. The problem with respect to screening has to do with we get away from individual people, and we start talking about different things. One, what's the frequency of the disease? So is it 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, 1 in 500,000 with respect to how likely is
Right.
it that we're going to find it? Why does that become important? Because not every test is perfect. And in fact, there is no perfect test. So there will be a certain thing called a false negative, meaning the test is negative, but you really have the condition. Okay, that's bad.
Right.
There's also a thing called a false positive, where in this case, a PSA, if you said, hey, you know, I'm 50, I get my PSA, your PSA comes back at 5, that's abnormal. You're not going to be happy. I'm going to call you up and say, hey, McGraw, you know, here's what it showed. Your PSA is 5, and think about what you go through after I tell you that.
Right.
Well, I got prostate cancer, and then you start contemplating death and all
Right.
this other stuff.
Right.
What if that 5 were false? What if that 5 really didn't mean that you didn't have prostate cancer?
Right.
And that's the false positive part. And so that's why the incidence of disease is important. Secondly, the significance of the disease. So some diseases like colon cancer and pancreatic cancer and ovarian cancer, from a cancer standpoint, if we just stick to cancers, are devastating. Almost universally, they are very invasive, very fast-growing, and they result in, unfortunately, death in a lot of people. The reason why, speaking of being 50, colon cancer screening with colonoscopies is recommended is that this is a test from a screening standpoint that really does work. You can find the beginnings of colon cancer very early on in terms of polyps and that type of thing, and you can treat the disease and you can get it before it gets full-blown, and that does save lives, which is the third part of a screening thing. Can you effectively save a life? And this gets into the medical lingo is this. It's number needed to treat. I would look at it, unfortunately, the Cardinals aren't a good example right now, but I would look at it like in baseball. So if you bat 300, that means every 3 out of 10 times you go to the plate, you get a hit,
Right.
no matter what it is. So, if you are going to save lives in terms of a screening test, you need to be way better than 300. You need to be more like 600 or 700.
Right.
But then that's counterbalanced by the cost and the invasiveness of a test. So PSA is pretty easy test, not that high a cost, but it has a high false positive rate. And the incidence of prostate cancer is not that high. And the severity of the disease across the big population, not any individual person, but across the big population, most of the time prostate cancer is not an advanced, highly powerful disease that devastates and results in death.
So with all this being said, what are you telling us?
So we do not have dream and beautiful tests that we can use for screening across the board. In the heart world, EKGs are not a screening test, and stress tests are not a screening test. A blood pressure really isn't a screening test. A blood pressure actually measures a real number, so that's not a screening test. We don't really have any good screening tests from cardiology. Colon cancer and colonoscopy, great screening tests. Mammograms for breast cancer, great screening tests. So not everything actually is as we would like it to be. That's, I think, the complicated piece.
So you're saying medicine still has a long way to go?
Well, medicine's very complicated.
Right.
And yes, we do have a long way to go because there's still a whole lot of people that are afflicted with things that theoretically we should have a shot at taking care of, right? And then we get curveballs thrown at us, like like Zika virus and new things that come up,
right.
Which we didn't know about 5 years ago that all of a sudden are there. But
so if your neighbor comes up to you and says, "Hey doc, I'm 50. Should I go get a PSA test?" What do you tell him?
Said no, but you should see your doctor. So the key is here, we should not over rely on tests. And we got to train doctors to do this too, and we do, because we're way more comfortable talking about tests and numbers.
Right.
Because that's the truth, right?
Right.
It turns out that that's not the truth in many situations. So the real answer with respect to, hey, I want to make sure that I'm doing okay and I'm doing what I need to do to make sure that if there's a preventative thing that I need to do, I need to be on it.
Right.
That's regular visit to your doctor. And having those discussions and being open with your doctor. If you have a concern, say, hey, I'm worried about prostate cancer, you got to bring that up. That's your job as a patient. And if the doctor, unfortunately, doesn't want to address that, well, that's sort of a negative from a doctor's standpoint. I would want to get a doctor that would listen to me.
Right.
Doctor has that discussion. You go through pros and cons of we could do this test, not do this test. What are the implications? You understand it. Then that makes perfect sense, whichever way you go.
Let me ask you a crazy question. There are some people who might be embarrassed to bring up something to their doctor. How often does that happen? And we should probably sort of lose that idea that I'm embarrassed to bring something up to a doctor.
Well, that happens a lot. There's a lot of things that are socially embarrassing. In my world, because I deal with heart disease and vascular disease, the embarrassing topic is erectile dysfunction. And do you think that thing, that Cialis or that Viagra thing that I saw on TV, would that work for me? That's one of the most embarrassing questions that my patients ask me, and sometimes it takes a little while.
Right.
So the doctor has to, in my opinion, set the right environment so that question's acceptable and open, and the embarrassment factor is minimized as much as possible. But that's not something I think anybody's just gung ho being able to just blurt out.
I guess that's part of being a doctor, right? Is to create that environment. It's one thing to know how to take and fix the guy's heart. It's another thing to know how to deal with him emotionally and everything else.
Yeah. So the deal with respect to medicine and being a doctor in my book is you got to be a people person, and you got to be able to interact with people, and people are all different. So, the advice with respect to screening and everything else and embarrassing questions, that type of thing, patients and people, your listeners, you're in charge of your health. Be in charge of your health. Take charge of your health. Don't turn that ball around and just say, oh, it's just going to happen to me or whatever. Take charge of it. And the way to take charge of it is to see your doctor regularly, keep tabs on your doctor, and if you're not happy, get a different one. And don't be embarrassed to ask questions. Ask the questions, and if you're going to forget, write them down before you go in and read from the list. I don't care.
Yeah.
I want to hear what your concerns are and what your issues are.
Dr. Michael Lim, cardiologist with SLU Care and SSM SLU Hospital. Why don't you bring in some samples next week of some of those blue pills? We can talk about it.
Oh yeah, you want the new advertised single pack, or you kind of want the bulk, kind of like from
I'll take
Sam's?
the bulk pack.
Whatever's
easier.
There you go.
Of yours?
There you go.
No, it's for show prep. What are you talking about?
You guys have a great day.
Thank you,
Thanks,
doctor.
doctor.
828, Big 550.